I think we can just start now. Verið öll velkomin, afsakið biðina og afsakið að kóðinn kom aðeins seinna, það var smá vesen. En í dag ætlum við semst að við erum með 3 fyrirlesara sem eru búin að vera að vinna verkefni með skólum og tengdum semst fjárfesting og bara þökkum bara fyrir innslagið frá þeim. The first speaker is Jordan Mitchell, who is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Iceland in sustainable business models and finance. Over the course of his career, he has written more than 100 case studies across a wide range of disciplines in over 30 industries on all continents. His cases have been published in EASA, Harvard Business School, Ivy, Darden, and Dalhousie, and have appeared in several textbooks and been the subject of multiple articles and abstracts, including one published by the Economist Intelligence Unit. He has also taught business and case studies, writing seminars in Spain, Iceland, Russia, and China. He has industry experience from Royal Bank of Canada, Sears Canada, Levi Strauss & Co., and a number of startups in energy, tech, and apparel. He is a graduate of Ivy School of Business in London, Ontario, Canada, where he holds a HBA and MBA. So Jordan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, Anita, and everyone. I saw that you actually have my presentation there. Do you mind carrying on? And
yes, I can.
Okay, it's just because then, as Luca and I were saying at the beginning, I can see, I know there's some people with their cameras turned off, but then I can see certain people as well. And so the theme that I'm looking at is how do companies choose sustainable finance? And that might seem kind of like a very basic question, but what I'm realizing as I go through it is that there's quite a bit to it. And there's a few angles that I actually wanted to run past everyone. So this presentation might be a bit on the unusual side in that I'm actually kind of looking for feedback because my situation is that I'm kind of closer to the end of my PhD and I need to do my 4th paper. And as I started exploring my 4th paper, I realized that there are lots of different routes that I can go down, which is common in research, of course, as people can appreciate. And I've narrowed it down to sort of 3 main options that I think have potential, but I also want to ask from a practitioner standpoint, what might be the most helpful to know. So that's, I'm going to be laying out the options and sharing anything that I've found to date on this. So if you can advance a little bit, Anita, I'll just say next, because I have some animations in here. So yes, so in this one, the GSS plus bonds, what do I mean by that? I think everyone would be tracking, but it's green, social, sustainability linked, and then there are a number of other bonds labels that you sometimes hear. For instance, the biggest one that I'll be talking about a little bit later is climate transition, and then there's also blue, and then there's some hybrids, and there's lots of different types of bonds. But essentially they started, as people might know, green bonds started first in 2007 and then have grown quite a bit. Over the past decade, they've grown a lot. But they've also shifted in the types of labels too, whereas sustainability linked bonds looked like they were going to grow a lot. It seems that the market has kind of has not seen too many issuances more recently of those. And the other thing that we know in general is that firms have increasingly embedded sustainability into their strategy and governance. Again, a very generalized statement, but I think we can see that definitely throughout Europe and in other jurisdictions as well. So the main question is, do we have clarity on firms and how they actually choose their sustainable instruments? And my entire study in my PhD is looking at the linkages between the sustainable business model and sustainable finance. So I'm kind of interested as sustainability becomes internalized, how does this affect the choice of instruments? So if you can go to the next one. So it is still within the ideation stage, and feedback is not only welcome, but requested. Next. So my possible paths forward is option one would be really just looking at the instrument choice. So how do companies choose sustainable finance, and how do they decide between these different types? Now, some people might say, well, the International Capital Markets Association, ICMA, has all of the guidelines laid out, green, social, sustainable, etc. And they just sort of slot and say, well, this is the most appropriate. Now, that's an oversimplification, because we know that oftentimes there are many other parties involved in the issuance of bonds, the big one being the underwriting bank and or banks. And then there's also the second party providers. There are sometimes consultants, obviously people internally within the company, different departments, the finance, sustainable strategy departments, and so on. So there's a lot going on as far as how they actually will decide on the type of instrument that they're going to try to issue. And then really I'm curious about how the sustainable business model relates to that decision of instrument type. So what I mean by that is, if you have a company that is early on in their sustainable journey, that might mean that they might be more inclined potentially to go with, say, a sustainability linked bond, or even a climate transition bond in the case of a hard to abate sector. But you might have companies also that, from a sustainable business model perspective, are very clear about the assets that they need in order to continue their business model, and the assets are clearly laid out, and therefore it might just make more sense to do a green. So these are the types of things that I'm interested in looking at. On option number two, this one is looking at it from a life cycle relevance perspective. So it's a bit different, but it's saying, as sustainable business models and governance systems internalize sustainability, how and why does the role of GSS plus bonds change? So this one I might approach a bit differently, which I can talk about in a minute, but it's kind of looking at a longer term. And the reason why is, probably people saw the headlines last year about the Italian company Enel. And Enel had green and sustainability linked bonds, and then they had gone back to more of a conventional bond. And I think many people in the market were surprised by this move. But Enel said, look, we're 80, 90% almost, we're a sustainable company right now. We don't, the labels did what they needed to do at the time, but maybe they're not as, I don't know exactly what they said, but they were suggesting anyway that for their situation, it maybe wasn't as vital to have a green or sustainability linked bond label. So it really does beg a lot of questions as to the life cycle of these particular bond instruments. Option number three is really looking at it from a transformation perspective. So how do firms engaged in sustainable business model transformation evaluate specifically climate transition bonds as a financing mechanism? Now, why did I zero in on climate transition bonds specifically? The main reason why is because they're brand new. Okay, that's arguable, but I'm saying from an ICMA perspective, ICMA just released in November 2025 their guidelines for climate transition bonds. So in the academic community anyway, I don't think yet there's a lot known about climate transition bonds, which is why I'm most interested in doing a study on that. Next slide. So if we go back to option one, just a few things here. The theoretical anchors that I'm thinking about using would be the capital structure choice. Don't know, again, whether these are referenced in daily life. They're definitely important from an academic standpoint. Obviously, signaling theory, I think that one comes up a lot. And then there's a lot of sustainable business model literature to draw on. And the potential methodologies that I'd be looking at would probably be starting with a qualitative interviews, doing mixed method. There is the possibility of maybe looking at a type of methodology that I have not performed in the past, which is emerging within the strategy and governance areas, systematic configurational analysis, looking at a number of variables over a period of time based on documents and other data inputs. Next. And so the contribution here would be extending financing choice to these instruments, linking business model characteristics to instrument selection, and also explaining heterogeneity across firms. So green versus the sustainability linked bond versus transition and conventional. Okay, so that's option one. So option two is life cycle relevance perspective. So the theoretical anchors here would be institutional theory, legitimacy, signaling again, decoupling, life cycle theory of markets, maturation of sustainability governance, and financial innovation in general. And the methodologies on this one most likely be a longitudinal case study. I could potentially use this QCA as well. And next, the main contribution here would be introducing the idea of a label relevance life cycle. I would like to explain the case like an L and potential label retreat and understand what circumstances that might occur in, and then added value of connecting sustainable finance instruments to the maturity of sustainable business models. Next slide. So option three on the sustainable business model transformation, the theoretical anchors on this one, again, would be the actual sustainable business model innovation and transformation theory. There is quite a bit going back, well, all the way probably to 2008 with Stubbs and Coughlin, and then progressing from there. But there's obviously institutional theory that would come in, as well as sustainability governance, green innovation potentially. And on the methodologies, I would be looking at qualitative mixed methods with survey. The main question, that I think researchers always have is, will I be able to get enough respondents if I do a survey? Will I have enough of a pool to have a statistically sound number of responses? Next. The contribution on option three would be really trying to clarify the role of these new climate transition bonds as incremental financial innovation or structural governance mechanism embedded in transformation strategy, decision-making within sustainability. So I'm still very interested about that, because I think what I've discovered in the papers that I've worked on in the past is that the bond conversation within a company was almost always finance, pure finance. And when the sustainability bonds came along, or all of the different labels, of course, that conversation started to grow within the company to many different areas. So it became a joint conversation between the sustainability strategy people and the finance people. Hence the whole idea of my PhD, which is why these particular bonds start to affect strategy and the other way around. So the role of, I think I've been through all of these, the role of sustainable governance in green innovation as well. So I think I'm coming to the end of my time here, but this is just a little bit of a comparison chart. I'm really curious, Anita, if we can set up a poll for everyone. It would be great to know if you could, I don't know if this is easy to do, if you just vote on one, or if you can actually order it. But I would love to know, based on what I've said, what would you be most interested in reading, for the people? If people have any questions, I can take them now, or either through the chat or just by speaking up.
The poll is up now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hit some button and I got disconnected, but did the poll get launched, or?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right. So option 3, okay, interesting, and option 1 as well. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if there are any other questions for me, and I don't know, Anita, how I'm doing on time.
You are right on time.
Okay. Yes, okay, so this is just my end. And I guess the other question, this one is, maybe Anita, we can follow up if there are certain volunteers, but if there are people that would be interested in talking with me afterwards about this, I am looking actively for interviewees. So really anyone that's either from a company, an issuing company that is looking at sustainable finance, or that has done any sustainable finance, especially in the areas of bond issuance, not necessarily having issued a bond, but considering issuing a bond, or anyone that is an intermediary, anyone that is involved in banking or in assessments, consulting. I would be so pleased to talk with you if you would be able to make the time for me. So any volunteers, maybe root through Anita, and then we can go from there. But thank you so much. I know that was maybe a little bit unusual in that I'm not coming out with necessarily hard findings for today, but I hope to maybe be back maybe with one of these papers, and then I can actually say to everyone what I've found by conducting the study.
Gunnar, varst þú spurningu?
Já, takk fyrir. Ég spurði eina spurningu.
Já, á ensku þá helst.
So, thanks, Jordan. Really good to see you again.
Oh, hey, Gunnar. How you doing?
Good, and
yeah.
Good to see your work progressing well. I know we talked about this in the past, but I also maybe want to pick your brain again. I mean,
yeah.
How do you see these kind of themes roll out for different kind of industries or sectors? Because as we know, and we discussed, it's very different between consumer, energy, real estate, financial, etc. I mean, have you identified any specific discrepancies or different incentives between different sectors?
Well, in fact, just so everyone knows, Gunnar has helped me think through some of this as well. And Gunnar, after our conversation and that specific question that you mentioned about sectors, it led me to option 3. And the reason why is because of the major differences in sectors. So what's happening on the green bond front is, and you know this, and probably many people know this, is that with energy companies, energy companies have a clear set of assets that they need to do. So oftentimes, and not always, but oftentimes it sort of leads them down a path into the green bonds. But then real estate might be similar, but then there are a number of other industries that probably wouldn't be classified as a sustainable business model, but want to potentially make investments that way, but might not be as clear cut on their investment side. It might have some positive parts to it, but it still might be polluting, right? So I think what I wanted to uncover in option 3, if I go that way with the climate transition bonds, is actually looking at a bit of a difference between industry. And so I guess the classic industries would say be manufacturing, that might have, primary energy sources that would not be renewable, as an example. What do they do? Or especially if they also look their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and they sort of, first of all, a lot of, I think, companies realistically find it hard to even measure with any accuracy after, well, sometimes scope 1, but then scope 2 and 3 definitely. And so I'm not really answering your question, Gunnar, but that's essentially what I'm looking to uncover, especially within option 3, is that difference between industry sectors.
Right. Good luck.
We'll see.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan.
Oh, thank you so much.
Next up is Luca. Luca is an economist whose interdisciplinary research span economics and applied finance, cutting across environmental and resource economics, industrial organization, and financial economics. He is a professor and a chair of climate change finance at the University of Edinburgh Business School and director of the Centre of Business, Climate Change and Sustainability. He is also a visiting senior fellow at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics and a fellow of CIFO's Energy and Climate Economics Group in Munich. Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll start sharing and I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. So thank you so much. Thank you, Anita and Eden, for having me here. It's a real pleasure to have an opportunity actually to speak. Before maybe I move on to say something about the research directions and industrial applications in sustainable finance, I would like maybe to say just a few quick words on where all this work sits. So as Anita was mentioning, I lead a center at the University of Edinburgh Business School. We are a cross-school cutting community of around 30 different researchers that bring together different type of expertise in business, economics, finance, but more importantly, I would also add climate science. So we do work quite a lot with colleagues in climate science and geoscience, and that you will see towards the end is quite relevant when it comes to understanding what exactly we're trying to measure. And our work clusters around 3 industry-oriented pillars. I will not go into the details here, I won't bother you, but if you're interested, please look at our website. So with that context, let me now go to the content of my presentation. So I would like to set a little bit of the scene of where we're standing now in terms of sustainable finance, the academic literature around sustainable finance. I assume most of you already know the sustainable finance 1.0. I would say that we're getting now into the 3.0. So I would like to say just a few words about the 2.0. What is that? And I will very much focus on the climate aspect of the sustainable finance because this is predominantly where most of us in the center operate. So most of the literature, the academic literature in this area has been trying or has been just about better understanding of the risk plumbing. Essentially how climate change amplifies standard financial risks and how those risks propagate through the economy into prices. So think of climate change as a risk amplifier, right? Across the familiar categories that you probably deal on a daily basis: operational risk from asset damages and downtime, market risk from repricing, and credit risk as a default probability or loss given default shift, right? Now, a useful way to think about these is through 3 transmission pipelines. And this is useful because it mirrors what exactly researchers are now doing in the Sustainable Finance 3.0, that is increasingly about assessing financial materiality so that we can speak to policymakers, so that we can speak to practitioners, so that we can speak also to investors in a way that modify the way they are designing policies or investing. And we look for measurable real economy channels, data on exposure and outcomes. So for example, we examine supply chain disruption, we look at input costs, we look at demand shocks for businesses, or even post-disasters, spending needs and revenue shortfall when it comes to country and municipalities. So we've been talking just about bonds, so think about municipal bonds, sovereign bonds, so how these shocks, post-disaster shocks affect their spending needs and the revenues shortfall. So all of this is fundamentals. And this is essentially what the Climate Sustainable Finance 3.0 is moving. So how do these pipelines propagate into markets and what can clog or block that transmission? So in principle, the channels operate through two levers: expected cash flows and discount rates for equity, and for debt markets translating to default risk or loss given default. Okay, now, so what we've been seeing so far. So the honest answers is mixed evidence, and often episodic evidence. So across different asset classes, real estate, equities, and credit, climate risk sometimes shows up in pricings, but rarely in a universal, stable way, right? And that's probably not surprising because different asset classes see the transmission pipelines with a different level of clarity, right? So think about real estate. This is tightly linked to location and collateral. Credit is inherently about downside and recovery value, and equity is actually much broader and noisier. So the key question now is, why don't we always see a clean universal pricing signal? And the very simple answer is depends on a number of frictions that the current literature is focusing on. So what I mean by friction, I mean behavioral frictions. Short term means low salience, low financial salience, data gaps sometimes, or actually inability of processing this type of information that's typically in literature, in academia, called rational inattention. It's costly to process that information. Therefore, we have analytical shortcuts, right? Or even belief and attention cycles. Think about disagreement about scenarios, about timing, plus periods when market and are simply focused on other drivers. So now that takes me to what I think is probably more relevant for you now. So brings me to a very practical frontier. And it maps actually directly to a simple question that I often discuss in class. If you cannot insure it, and if you cannot diversify it, what changes are rational, right? If you cannot diversify or insure the particular type of climate, what would happen? What is the rational changes that we should see? Start with transfer. In many places, the ability to transfer risk through insurance and reinsurance is becoming constrained, right? The pattern is familiar. Premiums goes up, exclusion expand, deductible rise, and in some cases you see a retreat of non-renewable. So essentially, insurance is no longer available. Now, they consider the diversification. Obviously, diversification helps when climate exposure is local and partly idiosyncratic. So, losses in one place or sector can be offset somewhere else. But the logic of diversification weakens as climate risk becomes more systematic, right? Through concentration by geography, by sector, by time horizon, through hazard that are increasingly correlated in a stressed situation. So when both transfer and diversification are limited, well, that's exactly when we should start seeing climate risk to show up more clearly, right? Through what? Through collateral values, for credit terms, through insurance condition, and obviously required returns or difference in spread for debt. So let me give you maybe just a couple of examples of where we're standing now. So let me take the diversification point and let me make it a little bit more concrete. And we start with the transition risk. So transition is not only about carbon pricing. It's a broader set of policy, technology, regulatory, and legal shift that actually change the cost structure and competitive positions of businesses. So the insight from a portfolio perspective here is that transition risk is often behaved like a systematic factor. So if you see in the literature, they say that actually what you're simply changing is the choice of how much you want to be actually exposed. And to take this a very recent, very recent debate in Europe about phasing out free allowances. So this is essentially a way of reducing the extra cost that companies are subject to in the carbon pricing that we currently have in Europe. Well, that created just a few days ago a widening in the value of the stocks of those companies that are supposed to be benefiting from a reduction in free allowances because they are positioned better on the business compared to the ones that are supposed to be losing out from the fact that, they've been doing quite a lot of extra investments in the past, so they should actually be rewarded. But if you weaken a bit the level of ambition, well, you actually reduce the value of investment done in the past. So this is also very much visible in a recent papers that we did, where we look at credit default swaps. We use the credit default swap as a lens through which you can distinguish between those companies that are perceived to be more at risk of transition. So you can look at this as those type of companies that are in a way the nature of the business, or the business is not actually transitioning, compared to the ones that are actually perceived to be less at risk, and therefore you buy or sell protection in different ways, right? And we created what we call a carbon risk factor. What you see in the graph down there, what you see in the graph actually here, is the evolution of the spread in this protection you're buying for a certain category of companies that are more at risk, and fewer protection that buy for companies that are actually less at risk. So that's exactly the same logic that you see here, whether here is happening in the equity space, here is happening in the credit space. And then we also see this in the on the physical side of climate. Take heat stress. Heat exposure is often much more local than transition risk. You would guess that. And its economic footprint is strongly sector dependent. So geographical exposure varies sharply depending on baseline climate, urban heat, infrastructure, and you name it, a lot of different things. And sectorally, you see it most clearly when work is physically constrained. So think about those classes of companies that operate in the outdoor, so outdoor labor, logistics, construction, agri, utility. So all these actually could cause disruption into the productivity. And that, again, gives a clear, a portfolio intuition. If the exposure is genuinely local, then diversification can work. You can reduce concentration by spreading geography and avoiding overweights in most of the exposed region. But sometimes that actually maybe not going to work, right? So you need to understand how this is potentially going to affect your investment. And again, here I'm just giving you two examples of papers where they look at how this particular how you should measure, what type of thermometer, so to speak, you should use to measure exactly the heat exposure, the temperature exposure on companies. And if you use the correct thermometer, you will be able to see companies that are differentially exposed geographically and sector-wise. So this is exactly where we are standing here at the moment in terms of sustainable finance, if you like, 3.0. So thank you. Very keen to hear your questions. If you are interested in the papers, some of the papers I just mentioned, you can actually find them online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luca. Any questions? Yeah, Gunnar?
Yeah, thanks, Luca. Very interesting. Maybe because in terms of today's kind of turmoil in the markets, and we see, a lot of questions about risk, both climate, physical, and transition risk, and especially like if we take it here, the Nordics, and I work in consulting, I work for Deloitte, so I work with a lot of players in this area. And one area that has come up is that in the Nordics, there's a sentiment that kind of Nordic banks and investors are less concerned about physical risks than in the South. That we see this more of a long-term risk, and we've seen this in many of the assessments by the big Nordic banks, for example. In your kind of research and work, Do you agree with this assessment? Are we in the Nordics? Are we underestimating this in how we do our risk models, or is this something have you looked at this in any way?
So I haven't looked specifically at the Nordic markets, but I can give you an example. Let me give you an example here. I think this logic, it's something that probably you can very easily apply to your clients, or even just when you have conversation with people discussing climate change. And I'll give you an example of Barclay Cap, or even NatWest. I had a similar-ish conversation with them. So Barclay has a relatively large portfolio of mortgages across UK, right? And this is on balance sheet, is relatively heavy. And these more or less clustered around north-south. So north is Scotland, there's probably 20% of stuff is actually in Scotland, and the remaining is essentially England, and very much concentrated around the greater area of London. Now, as long as everything was okay, and they were able to reinsure and insure their collateral, in a sense, everything was okay. But insurances have been starting upping up the cost of the insurance, or even entirely not insuring certain parts of their certain regions. Now, this is becoming a very large problem for Barclays, despite the fact that mortgages were relatively geographically spread throughout the UK. So that's already a big problem for them, actually a huge problem. So what I mean by that is that if you start thinking and applying this relatively basic logic of, can you insure? Yes. Okay, then not my problem. I'm paying someone, typically insuring a risk is cheaper than actually doing something else. You do insurance, disaster risk, you name it, or you even have some form of derivative. That's okay. But when you don't have that, then everything goes down to diversification. Now, I suspect that your case, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that you probably have a relatively geographical concentration of whatever type of asset class we are considering, real estate or even businesses. That to me is already problematic, right? From both actually dimension, physical and transition, right? So I think that by using this logic, these two very simple, you can then talk about adaptation and actually internalize the insurance. Actually, you build a buffer, but these should help you thinking that maybe also for Nordic is something that you should consider, physical risk included.
Thank you, Luca.
Okay, perfect. Then next we have Eysteinn. Svo við erum að skipta þessi íslensku. Eysteinn sérfræðingur í teymi lofthæða og losunar heimilda hjá Umhverfis- og Orkustofnun. Hann með meistaragráðu í umhverfis- og auðlindafræði frá Háskóla Íslands og bakkalárskráðu í fjármálaverkfræði frá Háskólanum í Reykjavík og milliríkja aðstoðardómari í knattspyrnu. Eysteinn, gólfið þitt.
Takk fyrir. Sjáu þið ekki örugglega skjáin hjá mér?
Jú, við gerum það.
Það svo lett. Sorry, Luca and Jordan, for switching to Icelandic. Ég heiti sem sagt Eysteinn og ég ætla að vera með erindi áhrif tíma á fjármagnslosun skráðra hlutabréfa. Þetta erindi byggt á meistarritgerðinni minni sem ég skilaði inn fyrir tæpu ári síðan. Þar sem að ég skoðaði eignasafn hjá 121 bandarískum kauphallasjóðum og greindi það eignasafnin og reiknaði fjármagnslosun þeirra með tveimur mismunandi aðferðum. Það er þá með píkafaðferð og síðan nýrri aðferð. Tökum aðeins svona bakgrunnin sem er á bakvið þetta, að þá fjármagnslosun tilkomin vegna fjárfestinga og telst til óbeinar losunar sem fellur það undir umfang 3, flokk 15. Og það eru eflaust margir sem að kannast við myndina sem er hann að hægra megin, þar sem búið að setja umfang 1, 2 og 3 fram með myndrænum hætti, að þá þetta undir downstream activities. Kauphallasjóðir Exchange Traded Funds, ETFs, sjóður sameiginlega fjárfestingu sem skráðar í kauphöll og þar fara fram viðskipti með hlutdeildarskírteinum að mestu leyti fram. Og aðferðin sem við vorum að nefna áðan, hún kemur frá Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, eða PCAF eins og það talaðum í daglegu tali. En PCAF býður meðal annars upp á aðferðafræði til þess að reikna losun frá skráðum hlutabréfum. Og bara til þess að sýna ykkur þessar tvær aðferðir og tilgangur með verkefninu var að bera saman og meta munin milli þessara tveggja aðferða. Að fyrsta aðferðafræðina, fyrsta formúluna, hún frá PCAF til þess að reikna fjármagnslosun frá skráðum hlutabréfum og það var tekið eignarstaðan í lok árs. Það fundið þarna tekið útistandandi upphæð á móti efikinu og fyrir þá hvert fyrirtæki í eignarstofninu og margfalda með kolefnislosun viðeigandi fyrirtækis. Síðan aðferðin sem ég var að bera saman við í ritgerðinni, þá hún sambærileg PCAF-aðferðinni nema að þá eignarhaldsstaðan tekin oftar yfir árið. Það hægt að reikna fjármagnalosun eins oft og vilja fyrir. Það hægt að taka hana á hálfsársfresti, ársfjórðungslega, mánaðarlega, daglega, þess vegna á mínútu. Það fer svolítið bara eftir hvert aðgengi á gögnum og reiknigetu og vilja til þess. En til þess að taka stutt sýnistæmi munin á milli þessara aðferða, segjum að það hefur verið mjög metnaðarfullur fjárfestir sem ætlar að kaupa 10% í fyrirtæki á hverjum ársfjórðungi og þetta fyrirtæki sem hann kaupi losar 100 tonn af koltvísýringi á ári. Að með PCAF-aðferðinni þá myndum við taka 40% sem hann á þá í lok árs og margfalda það með heildarlosuninni, þannig þá væri fjármagnslosunin 40 tonn. En með nýja aðferðinni og miðað við það að losunin sé reiknuð ársfjórðungslega eins og var gert í verkefninu, að þá þurftum við að taka heildarlosunina og deila með 4 og síðan værum við þá að skoða hvern ársfjórðung þar sem það væri alltaf að aukast í rauninni eignarhluturinn í fyrirtækinu, þannig að það þá 10, fer sinni 20, 30 og lokum 40%. Það sjáum við síðan útreikningana þarna í fjármagnslosunu þar að það samtals 25 tonn. Þannig að bara með þessu svona einfalda dæmi þá strax komin 15 tonna munur á því hvernig horft á eignarhaldstímabilin. Svona rannsóknaraðferðin sem var hérna á bakvið þetta, þá var ég að skoða 121 kauphallasjóði með gögnum frá 2023 og þar voru 113 kauphallasjóðir sem að fylgja vísitölu eða passive ETFs og síðan voru 9 stýrðir kauphallasjóðir actively managed ETFs og fjárhagslegu gögnin voru fengið frá Financial Modeling Prep og losunartölunar frá Carbon Disclosure Project. Ég ætla kannski bara rétt að nýta tækifærið og þakka eftir Reynir Smára sem var leiðbeinandi minn í verkefninu og ég styrsti verkefni þannig að það var hægt að kaupa gögnin frá CDP. Það munaði hellingum það. En svona niðurstöðunar að það var tölfræðilega margtökum munur milli þessara tveggja aðferða. Að meðaltali lækkaði losunin 3,3% með nýju aðferðinni, þar að segja það að taka eignarhaldstímabili oftar. Það var 6,6% lækkun hjá stýrðum kauphallasjóðum og síðan var 3,1% lækkun hjá vísitölu kauphallasjóðum. En eins og kom fram áðan að það voru langflestir að 113 sjóðir vísitölu kauphallasjóðir. Bara svona rétt í lokin, þá vildi ég sýna ykkur hvernig dreifingin á þessum sjóðum var. Það eru 113 sjóðir sem eru þarna innan rauða kassans og X-ásin tölulegu munur milli PCAF-aðferðinnar á móti nýja aðferðinni og X-ásin þá breyting í auminu eða eignum í stýringu milli fyrsta og fjórða ársfjórðungs. Ég vildi líka taka eitt dæmi þarna. Þið sjá það eru 3 punktar beint fyrir ofan rauða kassan. Þetta voru 3 sjóðir þar sem var töluverður munur á milli aðferða. Og þegar það var í rauninni, þegar ég fór að greina það betur, að það kom í ljós að allir þessi 3 sjóðir áttu eitt sameiginlegt að hafa selt í olíufyrirtæki í 4. ársfjórðungi. Og þannig að í píkahaferðinni að þá var í rauninni, það áttu ekki lengur hlut í þessu olíufyrirtæki undir loka árs, þannig að þá var í rauninni losunin bara 0. En með nýja aðferðinni að þá var tekið eignaðartímabilið 4 sinnum á ári og þá var losunin á fyrstu 3 ársfjórðungana að reikna með inn í fjármagnaða losunina. Og þá var gífurlegur munur þarna á milli og þetta er rauninni gefur svona augaleið það að þarna er svona hætta á mögulegum grænþvotti. Sérstaklega núna er að vinna alltaf í ETS-unum með losunarheimildir og ef það myndi koma eitthvað svona losunarheimildir fyrir fjármagnaða losun, saman með hvað hætti það væri, að þá þurfti klárlega að koma í veg fyrir svona grænþvott og leið til þess að komast fram hjá þessu. Þannig að ég ætla bara að segja takk fyrir mig og endilega koma með spurningar ef það eru til staðar.
Já, engar spurningar, þá er það bara komið undir lok.
Ég er enda með eina spurningu, Eysteinn.
Já.
Þannig að ég tala gegnum aðeins, ég heiti Iðin. Ég er að pæla að þú ferð aftur á þarna síðustu glæruna þína.
Það hér?
Já, þarna SPY-G, er það S&P 500 leiðrétt fyrir ESG-mælikvörðum? Eða, veistu það?
Nei, þetta er rauninni, þetta er stuttaheitið á sjóðunum. Ég man ekki hvað vísitölu hann var að fylgja, hvort það var S&P 500 eða 700 eða eitthvað líka.
Ok.
Nú,
ég var bara, já, einmitt. Ég ætlaði bara að athuga hvort þetta hefði eitthvað með þá þarna því það komu svona Evrópulöggjöf heiti á sjóðum, þannig að þú máttir ekki eiga í olíufélögum. Þannig hvort þetta hefði eitthvað með það að gera en allt ekki að þau sko.
Ég þori ekki alveg að fara með það hvort að það tengist eða ekki. Þetta eru samt í rauninni sama bandaríski sjóðir, þannig að ég myndi ef að það hefði verið ástæðan.
Ok, takk fyrir.
Þá erum við bara komin að lokum hjá okkur í dag, ef það er ekki fleiri spurningar. Við erum síðan með næsta viðburð er 24. mars og við erum komin með skráningarsíðu fyrir hann og þið getið ef þið viljið, þá er það hérna á QR-kóðunum. Annars þökkum við bara fyrir innlætið. Luca and Jordan, thank you very much for coming today and presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you.